All right, Mr. Chairman, floor is yours if you'd like to begin.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert White. I'm the COG Board Chair for this year. I'd like to call our February meeting of the COG Board of Directors to order, and want to thank everybody for joining us virtually for this meeting. Recognizing that this is a virtual platform, we request your patience, including from kids entering the screen, and ask for your microphones to be muted. If you would like to speak, please make sure to unmute your line and then return to mute. That will help us avoid any unnecessary noise and confusion. And we also ask that you take advantage of the chat box. First, I would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I will provide a reminder of all virtual meeting logistics. And we may start the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice.
Mr. Chair,
There we are. Should be better now. I think I had a small internet connection issue. Should be cleared up now. So we will proceed with today's meeting. After my initial remarks, Sharon Pandak, who has been monitoring the participants box, will complete a roll call to document your presence at this meeting. Our webinar's audio and visual are being live streamed on the COG website through COG's YouTube account. To facilitate questions for our speakers as smoothly as possible during the meeting, there are two options. The first is to indicate in the chat function that you have a question. After I facilitate those, I will then verbally call for any questions from each state, call state by state. This is a good moment for those who are on the phone to let us know that you have a question you would like to ask. During votes, after a motion to adopt a resolution is made and properly seconded, we will proceed to discussion. After discussion, I'll first ask for abstentions and nay votes. I ask that you state your name and jurisdiction and state your vote. The rest of the votes I will take as a yes vote. So everyone who is silent, I will take as a yes vote, silent and present. Okay, Sharon Pandak, if you would please take the roll of who is present at today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From the District of Columbia, I have Chair White. Is there anyone else from the district? From the state of Maryland, I have Mr. Collins, Ms. Schaefer, Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Navarro, Mr. Davis, Ms. Newton, Ms. Stewart. Is there anyone else from the state of Maryland?
Sidney Harrison.
Thank you, sir. I have you down then. You make the quorum, I think.
Tara Jackson.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from Maryland?
Mike Les.
My apologies. Who was that?
Mike Les Floral.
Okay, thank you. And then from the Commonwealth of Virginia, I have Mr. Wilson, Mr. Dorsey, Ms. Gross, Mr. Lusk, Mr. Snyder, Ms. Briskman, Ms. Randall, Mr. Wolf, Ms. Wheeler, and Ms. Bailey. Anyone else from the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Daryl Moore, Manassas Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to take a moment to welcome a new COG board member who we just heard his voice, Councilmember Daryl Moore from the city of Manassas Park. Councilmember, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Chairman White. My name is Daryl Moore. I was recently elected to the city council here in Manassas Park. I've lived in the city for about 2.5 years. Originally, I'm coming from Berkeley, California, where I served on the city council in Berkeley for 12 years. I relocated to Virginia to be closer to my 8 grandchildren, and it's great to be in the area and of the service. I look forward to working on the COG board. Thank you.
Wonderful. Very happy to have you on the board and in the region. And we certainly look forward to working with you as well. Next order of business is the District of Columbia Statehood Task Force, which I'm partial to. At last month's meeting, the board approved the creation of a task force to examine the current legislative initiative for DC statehood. And I would like to ask the task force chair and creator of the task force, Derek Davis, to provide an update on that work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Partial to DC statehood. We are proud to be your compatriots with regard to being partial to the District of Columbia statehood, especially my colleagues in Prince George's County and Montgomery County, who by resolutions of both of their councils supported that effort in the past. And if you can see, today I wear my 5151 button. But the task force has been under the course of development. We have begun to have conversations, and we're rounding out the task force at this point. Currently, myself, Vice Chair Dorsey, Ms. Randall from Loudoun County, and Denise Mitchell from the city of College Park have had some conversations, preliminary conversations about the establishment of the task force. We've invited and received confirmation that both Justin Wilson from the city of Alexandria and Reuben Collins, my colleague in Charles County, will join that task force. And we may add one or two more people to the task force. And we seek to also add at least one person from the District of Columbia. And since you're the chair of COG, it probably won't be you, Mr. Chair. We probably will add Mr. Mendelson if Mr. Mendelson is amenable. The task force has been taking the conceptual task force has been taking a look at many of the things that are pertinent to statehood, the realities that we all know and bear, that the District of Columbia is larger than several states by just population, understanding that ultimately the District of Columbia's taxpayers pay a high federal income tax, and they do not have equitable representation in our Congress and in our United States Senate. And so those pieces, along with the realities that we faced maybe a month ago and that we're still stirring about as we go through this impeachment hearing and have to see every day with the Army National Guard and the realities of their response at our Capitol, what's created from the perspective of public safety, all we know too well now that we need a better and more forceful response to. So the task force is underway. I have to thank our staff, Mr. Bean, Ms. Beruti, and to get us moving. Our hope is that what we will have is a resolution that can come before the COG board in the very near future that will essentially lay out the things that we find that are pertinent to a resolution that can say that this region supports the District of Columbia statehood. And if the word "now" hasn't been used, I think that might be one of the exclamation points at the end of every sentence that we need to put forth. We know that there's some challenges. We've had conversations with our congressional representatives, our senatorial representatives in the region, and it's going to come to bear. So I'll take, since I took more than a minute and a half that I had planned, let me just check in with my what I would call my co-chair, and that's Vice Chair Dorsey, just to see if there's anything that he would want to add that I may have missed. Good to go? All right. So look forward to possibly hearing a little more from us in the month of March, definitely by the month of April. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Very excited about your work in that report. I would now like to turn to agenda item 3, the executive director's reports. I will turn it over to Chuck Bean to give us updates for that report.
Thank you. Piece of nice news as part of federal COVID relief funding, we've received an additional $600,000 in funding to be awarded via grants to enhance mobility partners, which provide transportation support to seniors and individuals with disabilities. Usually this is a 2-year cycle wherein we award about $6 million. So this is a nice addition. There's more information in the consent agenda and on our website. I'd like to go to 2 substantive items. First is to Scott Boggs to give us the report on a wireless service completion in the Metro Rail system. So Scott Boggs.
Thanks, Chuck. It looks like my video is coming online. I apologize for that delay. As many of you know, the effort to provide cellular service to the riders and employees of the WMATA underground system has been underway for over a decade and has faced several challenges. In January of 2015, an incident that occurred at the L'Enfant Plaza metro station highlighted the need for improved communications in that underground. A cross-cutting group of subject matter experts, including representatives from the 911 directors and the fire chiefs, have completed a study identifying cellular coverage in the underground accessible to the public as a priority for public safety. WMATA and COG have continued to work together where appropriate to make this a reality, and we're very proud of the WMATA team's accomplishment. As a side note, after doing research on the subway systems in the nation, we found that WMATA is the only system in the United States with access to all major carriers in 100% of the publicly accessible underground. So this is definitely a milestone, not just for WMATA, but for our nation and the subway systems. With that, I'll turn it over to Chuck.
Thank you. And it might be an oversimplification. You all are used to having your own fire department in your jurisdiction. Oversimplification, WMATA does not have a fire department. So if there's an incident, the district or Prince George's, Arlington, Fairfax, etc., all those protocols need to be in place. So Scott's team supports the Fire Chiefs Committee, supports a number of subcommittees under that, including the Passenger Rail Safety Committee. So just a little bit of glimpse on how that regional coordination takes place. I'd like to go now to Kanti Srikanth, our Deputy Executive Director for Metropolitan Planning, a little update on our climate action work. Kanti.
Thank you, Chuck. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I will provide a brief update on recent activities on one of the board's priorities. The board has identified climate change as a priority topic. One of the major actions that the board took on this front was in 2019 when it joined the Global Covenant of Mayors, and if I may say, Global Covenant of Mayors and Counties, and being recognized as a US metro scale leader. Then in 2020, last year, COG developed and adopted this past October a target for reducing greenhouse gases by 2030. This is a new interim target since the board had previously adopted a target for 2050. I'm now happy to report that the board's Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee finalized an action plan to serve as a resource document. It's really a document that lists various strategies that the members individually and the region collectively can take to help achieve the target reductions by 2030, and also to put us on a path to achieve our 2050 target as well. And Ms. Gross headed the work activities of the Climate Energy Policy Committee. We'll be happy to brief the board on this action plan document. But meanwhile, staff has begun taking this document to the various other committees that work here on other sectors. We have presented the action plan and its components to the Planning Directors Advisory Committee. We have taken it to the TPB's Technical Committee, and we will be taking it to the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee later this month. So the purpose of doing this, taking this to all these different sectors and the committees that work on those different sectors, is to really achieve a multi-sector engagement on efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. There are opportunities in every sector to take action, and we really need their engagement and we need to collaborate. Another major activity that I'm happy to report is currently, again, working with the Climate Energy Policy Committee. We have developed in a draft form a tree canopy resource guide for our members. This document provides a number of ideas and examples of policy actions that we can take in this region to increase tree canopy. And that is important. Trees are a critical element of the strategy to sequester greenhouse gases. We'll be happy to bring the document to this board once it's finalized. And then last but not least, the Transportation Planning Board has begun to take a detailed technical analysis to identify the levels of outcomes that would need to be achieved in the various types of strategies for transportation that is listed in COG's action plan to help reduce greenhouse gases within the transportation sector. The board has said it needs to know these specific levels of outcomes so it can target and go after achieving those. So this effort, this study is anticipated to be completed by the end of the year, and we will be bringing the results back to this board as well. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman, and I'll turn this back to Chuck.
Thank you. That's the 3-minute version on some very complex topics. If I were to summarize it, last year this board approved some aspirational goals for 2030. This year is about implementing those goals. So that's the action plan, and it'll be briefed before those other disciplinary entities. Chairman White, I have a number of things to observe on coronavirus and vaccine distribution, but I think I'm going to save most of them, if time allows, for item 11 when Dr. Gales is before us. But let me just highlight one. COG kicked off a webinar series last Friday to help accelerate learning on vaccine administration, vaccine distribution, dose administration. We had speakers from the National Association of County and City Health Officials and the Executive Director of the Association of Vaccine Managers. If you're interested, this Friday, we have a speaker from Johns Hopkins Business of Health Initiative, and John Auerbach, who's the CEO of Trust for America's Health. So I think staff is going to drop a link to that webinar series in the chat. And we have a couple great speakers for the following Friday, February 19th, that we'll be announcing in the next couple of days. So Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions on those. And if time allows, I'll share more about vaccine distribution toward the latter part of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Yeah, I anticipate we'll have a robust discussion around agenda item 11, so that works well. We will move now to agenda item 4, amendments to the agenda. Following the sponsorship of Metro funding legislation, which I know most, if not all of us, are excited about, the Executive Committee discussed adding an agenda item on today's agenda. The suggested amendment and supporting documents were sent out to the board on Monday. I'd like to ask for a motion and a second to add dedicated federal funding for Metro to today's agenda following item number 8.
So moved.
Second.
Wonderful. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on adding this item to today's agenda? I will only note that both the House and the Senate bill have a $2 million mark. And so our letter and will be supporting a mark of at least $2 million. So I think this is obviously a good thing and appropriate for us to do. Is there any further discussion here? Hearing none, I will call for a vote. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? Hearing none, and I would ask COG team to flag me if you see something in the chat. I don't right now. Hearing no abstentions or nay votes, the motion passes. We will move now to agenda item 5, approval of the minutes from the January 13th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the January 13th board meeting?
Second.
Wonderful. Are there any abstentions or nay votes?
Mayor Chairman, I will abstain from Daryl Moore.
Duly noted. Any other abstentions or nay votes? Hearing none, the motion passes. We move now to item 6, the consent agenda. We have 3 resolutions on the consent agenda today, which you can find on page 18 of your board packet. Let me just give a moment for everyone to get caught up on the agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent agenda items? I'm sorry, did I hear?
Mr. Chairman, this is Christian Dorsey. I move approval of items R13, 14, and 15, 2021.
Gross second.
James, that's second.
Wonderful. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? Hearing none, the motion passes. Agenda item 7, the FY 2021 second quarter financial report. For this item, I invite COG Secretary Treasurer Rodney Lusk and COG Chief Financial Officer Julie Mussog to brief us on the fiscal year 2021 second quarter financial report. I will turn it over to Mr. Lusk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a few introductory remarks here. As you'll see in your board package, the second quarter financials for FY 2021 is in your board package starting on page 30, showing the results for the quarter that ended December 31st, 2020. This is an interim, unaudited report prepared by management. I reviewed the financial information with Mrs. Mossad, our Chief Financial Officer here at COG, and I want to publicly acknowledge and thank her for the time that she spent with me going over these financials. She answered all my questions, and I am delighted to report that we are in a very strong financial position due to her and Chuck's leadership. With that background, I will turn this over to Julie to provide additional details and take any questions that you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The budget for FY21 is to end the year with $175,000 surplus. We're exceeding that at the end of the second year, surplus of $1.3 million from operations and our $35.2 million operating budget. This surplus at the end of Q2 is primarily a timing issue where we have collected funds in advance of expenses being recognized. 2 programs driving the increase in project fund balance are the Regional Housing Impact Analysis and Street Smart. The increase in the undesignated fund balance is driven by the actual indirect reimbursement being higher than target, which is a timing issue, and some Department of Environment program projects that have received undesignated funds in advance of spend. Operating revenue and expenses are tracking lower to both the fiscal 2021 budget and mid-year totals for the prior year. This is in large part a timing issue as well, and we expect to track closer to the fiscal budget by the end of the year, with the exception of some spending in the Commuter Connections program. Due to COVID restrictions, promotional expense has decreased significantly, and we do not expect this to rise to the budgeted level before the end of the fiscal year. This is a cost reimbursement project, so both the expenses and revenues will be lower than budget. Another major variance year to date is the subrecipient pass-through funds, which are at 20% of the amount budgeted. Pass-through funds for a repower project budgeted in the fiscal year have not yet been received, but the project was approved by the funding agency in late December, and we expect to have some of the revenue in fiscal 21, but the bulk of it will probably push into fiscal 2022. Most of these program funds are paid to outside entities for direct project expenses, so it should not be a revenue issue for COG's overall bottom line. The statement of net position as of December 31 shows an overall increase in net assets of $1.2 million. This increase reflects the impact of the Q2 operating surplus. Overall, COG remains financially healthy and board designated reserves are 100% funded. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I want to thank you both for the report. Doesn't look like we have any questions. I don't think I'm missing any. Report makes sense. We appreciate your work on that, both Mr. Lusk and Ms. Mussog. Thank you very much. Turning to agenda item 8, public safety, mutual aid, regional collaboration. For this, we're going to be joined by DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency Director Chris Rodriguez. Do we know if he is on yet?
I have not seen him join, Scott. I think we're expecting him in about 5 minutes. If he's not
Okay.
here, Chairman, you could elect to put the next item.
Okay.
He just texted me that he's logging on right now, so I don't know if you want to wait a minute and give him a chance or move on.
Opportunity for Chairman filler remarks.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I have seen that Mr. Elrich, Mr. Adams, and Mr. Meyer have joined us.
Okay, wonderful. Glad to have each of you join us. So as we wait for Director Rodriguez, let me just take a moment to again thank all of our regional first responders for all of the work that they did around the January 6th insurrection. Certainly, I'm seeing a lot of recognition across the country for the work that our first responders did, and truly want to thank them on behalf of myself and the COG board. I do see Director Rodriguez, my fellow Washingtonian here. So Director Rodriguez, we're very happy to have you with us today to speak about the public safety response to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and riots leading up to the inauguration. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman White, Councilmember White. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to discuss with the COG board the response to the January 6th insurrection, some of the changes in the planning assumptions that we had for the inauguration, and of course, the deep relationships and support that I think are first class in this region as compared to the rest of the country, as we all work together to create a safe and secure national capital region. It's important to note that even prior to January 6th, many of your jurisdictions already had resources in the district because there was information and intelligence indicating that we could have large-scale demonstrations prior to the 6th. If you recall, many of you who spoke with your police chiefs, I'm sure, know that we did start to see individuals come into the district the weekend prior to the 6th. On the 3rd, I believe, which was that Sunday, if I have my dates right, we did begin to see individuals arriving. And so there was some concern about some activities that we might see on the 4th, 5th, and then, of course, leading up to the big event on the 6th. So many of your jurisdictions were already here, helping the Metropolitan Police Department make sure that security within the city was maintained. So I want to thank the region for that support. I would say in this case, and particularly for the 6th, and I'll get in a second to the immediate response to the insurrection, but our mutual aid framework that COG has really facilitated on behalf of the COG jurisdictions, it worked. The support was there prior to the insurrection. Your police departments and your personnel were here in the city working directly with the Metropolitan Police Department to make sure that the First Amendment demonstrations, while many of us may or may not agree with the First Amendment and freedom of speech that we're hearing espoused, it is our constitutional duty to ensure that First Amendment rights are protected and guaranteed here in the nation's capital. So I want to thank you for that support. We will engage with the COG and the Police Chiefs Committee on after action reports, as we always do for any major incident. And so we look forward to working with your departments to see what we could do better. But again, I would say at a very high level, the mutual aid framework, again, that has been facilitated by COG and put into effect by your departments, it worked. The structure worked. I want to talk a little bit about what happened in the immediate law enforcement response to the Capitol. when we had immediately sort of known that the barriers had been breached at the Capitol, immediately, at least here at HCMA, and of course across district government, we began sending out EMAC requests, Emergency Management Assistance Compact requests, to the surrounding states. That's the way the process works. We had our mutual aid frameworks in effect as well with the local jurisdictions, and immediately we saw immediate responses. And I know firsthand from speaking to the MPD officers that were directly involved in clearing the capitals, I know Councilmember White has as well, that your officers stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the Metropolitan Police Department, the U.S. Capitol Police, in clearing that building. And I think, again, that just only underscores the relationships, the common bonds that we have here in this region. And it really is it was a terrible incident that happened, but I think our response to that in clearing the Capitol within a couple hours, within a few hours, again, really underscores the response that we got, not just from the local jurisdictions, but from the states and also in the National Guard resources that were sent in by your governors. What I think that really helped us do in planning for the inauguration was that we just sustained that level of cooperation and operational tempo. We stayed in a very elevated security posture, again, with the support of your jurisdictions here in the Capitol. We really augmented our planning and operational capabilities with National Guard resources. Many of you saw the nearly 25,000 Guard personnel that were immediately deployed to the Capitol. And again, just kind of built on that significant regional cooperation that already existed to make sure that the inauguration went out largely without incident, and it did. Again, a lot of that is due to the overwhelming security presence we saw here in Washington, D.C., but it was a testament, I think, to our regional cooperation. What that did for us was that it was a very well-executed, well-planned, well-executed inauguration event. And we have to remember, right, that the planning for the inauguration goes on at least a year before the actual event. And so we were already in a very strong position to be able to carry out the inauguration. We knew coming into it, the election would be contested. We knew that it would be a tense time, no matter who won the election, from election day all the way to the inauguration. So in some respects, we were already within that mindset. And so I think going forward, what we really want to do is just continue to look at the mutual aid requests. I know they've been in effect since 2005, so over 15 years now. We'll do the after actions with the police chiefs. We'll make sure we fine tune and refine any gaps, and there's always gaps, and there's always things we could have done better in any after action. But we want to make sure that we are working out and ironing out those kinks. So I hope this was helpful, Chair White, and to the members of the COG board. I only want to speak for a few minutes and be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Director Rodriguez. We are going to have a number of conversations on the response to the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th and other related items. And I recognize that you and other local agencies are still at the beginning of kind of digging through everything that happened, working through the after action reports. I also recognize that for the January 6th attack, our local agencies don't have primary jurisdiction. So there's a lot of this, the majority of what most of us really want to know is going to have to come from our federal agencies. But we did want to have you in early to really help us as an initial kind of point understand how the mutual aid agreement worked. And you kind of preempted my first question, which was whether there are any necessary updates to the mutual aid agreement that you see so far. I know you mentioned you're still kind of assessing that. Is there anything to share at this point?
Chair White, I think you make a really great point about the jurisdictional challenges that we face at times. And I know this became an issue, or was an issue, for some of our surrounding jurisdictions during the demonstrations we saw over the summer in the May-June timeframe. And that is something we still need to work out with our federal partners. And you're exactly right that a lot of this depends on the ability of our federal partners to secure federal lands, right? And for our surrounding jurisdictions, what we have seen is that they like to deal with the district, right, with their counterparts, and so there is some of that district to federal coordination that we're going to be working through in the coming months, and some of that has already begun. As we are meeting with them much more frequently, particularly with the impeachment trial, the joint session, which is scheduled for later this month, and then, of course, the possibility of additional demonstrations on March 4th, which for history buffs is the original date of the presidential inauguration, which a lot of the former president's supporters would like to come back to, quote, inaugurate the former president. So we're looking at that as well.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to mention this early, but I do want to commend all of the local law enforcement for the job they did for the inauguration. And certainly, under very difficult and unprecedented circumstances, you all work with federal partners in an extraordinary way. One other question, I have another, but I'll wait till later. But one other question for now, Director Rodriguez, is can you walk us through how the mutual aid agreement worked on January 6th? Was DC called by federal agencies and then DC called other surrounding jurisdictions, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on the jurisdictions. The mutual aid agreements were activated prior to the 6th. If you're asking about the immediate law enforcement response to the Capitol, the Metropolitan Police Department was called by. Remember, and all of you on the call know this, but it's worth mentioning. The Capitol is almost sovereign land, right? And so the Metropolitan Police Department, nor can any other local jurisdiction or law enforcement entity come onto the Capitol grounds unless they are invited by relevant Capitol authorities. And so once the Capitol Police realized that the situation was getting out of their control, they had requested Metropolitan Police Department and Fire and EMS, which responded within minutes to the Capitol. And at that point, the Metropolitan Police Department did then begin to, in some cases, call in new, but also augment existing law enforcement resources that were already in the city to the Capitol with the consent of the U.S. Capitol Police, because the district cannot request mutual aid on behalf of a federal agency or entity.
Thank you. One of the many complications about this this jurisdiction. Thank you very much. I want to open it up to my board colleagues. So if you have questions, would ask that you indicate that. Raise your hand. If I don't see you, shout at me.
Chair White, in the chat, Supervisor Briskman asked, do we have any new timeline as to when the National Guard will be leaving the district?
Thank you for the question. A lot of this depends on, and again, I think this is important, the complexity of the jurisdiction. The District of Columbia, the city, has requested that 550 DC National Guard resources remain on standby as a quick reaction force to be able to deploy anywhere in the city within 20 minutes, if needed, in an extraordinary circumstance through March 12th. That request has been approved by the acting Secretary of the Army. Now, the DC National Guard does not report or is not subject to the authorities of the mayor of the District of Columbia, which in and of itself, I think, is something that needs to be revisited. But we made that request on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Department. That request was approved. Other federal authorities can request DC National Guard. And so the Capitol, the White House, like the Secret Service, has requested National Guard resources to remain at those facilities, the White House and the Capitol, through March. And so that is not all DC National Guard personnel. The DC National Guard is about 1,800 strong. There will be about roughly, and again, this fluctuates, between 6,000 and 7,000 National Guard that remain in the district through March.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions for Director Rodriguez? One other question I have, Director Rodriguez, you mentioned March 4th. Experts seem to be indicating that there's going to be, for the foreseeable future, more demonstrations and events by sort of extremist groups here in Washington, D.C. Is that what you foresee, and what impact does that have on regional law enforcement?
We do anticipate, and the DC Fusion Center has been working with your local fusion centers in Maryland and Virginia to make sure that we are getting all the information we need here in the city, including not just things you can find in what we call in intelligence parlance, the open source intelligence, but also law enforcement sensitive intelligence that we can use to, as Chairman White is saying, to build the threat picture. And to answer your question, Chairman, we've been doing that over the last several weeks, and we've been doing that, and we've created a threat analysis that's been sent to the fusion centers. So I suggest that perhaps you try to access the board try to access that. We send it through our secure networks on the through the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And what we talk about there, Chairman, is this is a threat that we're going to have to be dealing with at least through the end of the calendar year, and potentially for multiple years. And it's not new, first of all, and it's not going away. And in some respects, what our analysis shows is that while we've seen right-wing extremism sort of permeate throughout the American bloodstream for centuries, the challenge now facing us is really, it's actually threefold. First is that it's actually entered the cultural mainstream, which is something, if you look at previous movements, that has not been the case. It's been very fringe elements that have been rooted out or at least mitigated by the American sort of system. The other is that as the FBI and federal authorities are arresting and charging a lot of the January 6th rioters and people who participated in the insurrection, they're going deeper underground and not communicating on open forums. So that requires law enforcement to have additional tools to be able to assist state and local authorities. And then really the third one is this, the fact that we're seeing a lot more of these individuals come from military and law enforcement, having those types of backgrounds. If you review, and we have through intelligence, if you review the assault, the insurrection at the Capitol, military tactics were used, and unsealed documents from the FBI and U.S. Attorney's offices across the country indicate military-style training did take place in several states prior to the insurrection. And so this is a movement that's growing. It's a movement that requires us to have additional tools to counter it. And it's just not going away. I know it's a long answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, but it's something that we are very concerned about.
I appreciate it. It's something that's important for us to be aware of as regional leaders. So I want to thank you. Are there one last chance? We got about 2 minutes left. If there are any other questions.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chair Randall.
Yes, Ms. Randall.
Thank you. This is important and a little horrifying, to be quite honest. You just made the statement that right-wing extremism is entering the cultural mainstream. So I have a question that I don't really expect an answer on right now, because I think it'd be a longer, harder answer, and I'd like to maybe talk to you about it later, or somebody about it later. What do we do to help prevent that in advance? And some of this behavior, I mean, it's literally kind of cult-like behavior. that will require some, for lack of a better term, deprogramming at some point. So one, how do we prevent it? And two, how do we deprogram people at the time that they're ready for that? Because if this keeps going in this direction, I think that what we saw on January 6th won't be so unusual anymore. It'll be something that we see pretty often. And so this is one of these moments where if we can head something off before it gets even worse, it's a great time to do that. So if anyone, maybe Scott or anyone else at COG can talk about prevention, is it having people more involved in the community in other ways? What are we looking for? Just what should we do? Because it's pretty horrifying, to be honest. So thank you.
Chairman, if I could, I know I only have 30 seconds, but if I could just answer it really quickly, Ms. Randall. It's a combination of a few things. The first is hard and the second is soft, right? The hard power answer to it is increased law enforcement, cooperation and information sharing, not just between states, local jurisdictions, but also with the federal government. The second is this terrorism and violence prevention programs that we really need to invest in with our communities, because at its root, these movements originate locally. And there are people that know about it and should be encouraged to report it. Then they spread, right? Across state borders, they spread nationally. It's inherently a local problem, and one that I think in our communities we can help root out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you again, Director Rodriguez, for being here today, for all the work that you and your team are doing. We're going to move now to the next agenda item, dedicated federal funding for Metro, which we mentioned earlier during amendments to the agenda. Securing dedicated funding, federal funding for Metro has been a long-standing priority of the COG board. As the current PREA funding is set to expire, Congress is considering new legislation to reauthorize their federal contribution. Legislation has been sponsored in both the House and the Senate, requesting $2 billion in federal funding over the next 10 years. I'm very happy to report that the legislation is co-sponsored and supported by every member of our regional congressional leadership delegation. I would like to propose a resolution and corresponding letter be sent to the leadership in the House and Senate, urging them to approve federal funding for Metro, both capital and operating funds, in the amount of at least $2 billion over 10 years. First, I would like to ask for a motion and a second to approve Resolution R17-2021, and then I will open the floor to any discussion. Is there
So moved, Chair Randall.
Thank you.
Second.
Snyder.
Many seconds. Thank you.
Yes.
Hearing a motion in many seconds, I would like to ask if there are any additional questions or comments from board members in Maryland. Any additional questions or comments from board members in Virginia? The District of Columbia. The only thing I will say as a District of Columbia member is that it is important for us to weigh in on issues like this. Metro funding is a priority for our region, but not necessarily a priority for the country. And there's always a lot of competition for federal dollars. And many times there are attempts to cut this funding, sometimes nominally, sometimes significantly. And we want to be a squeaky wheel on this issue. It's important that we always weigh in. So I am very happy that we are moving this resolution. Seeing no questions or other comments, are there any abstention or nay votes? Hearing none, the motion passes. Moving along to agenda item 9, economic development opportunities for collaboration. For this agenda item, we are excited to hear from Fairfax County Economic Development Authority President and CEO Victor Hoskins, who has been making his way around the region. Good to see you, Mr. Hoskins. And we're also welcoming Prince George's County Economic Development Corporation President and CEO David Iannucci in their respective states' economic development alliances and opportunities for regional collaboration. Mr. Iannucci, very, very glad to have you. After this presentation, the board will be asked to adopt Resolution R16-2021, supporting the collaboration of economic development initiatives in our region. So with that, let me turn it over first to Mr. Hoskins, and following Mr. Hoskins, we will hear from Mr. Iannucci.
Chairman White, it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see you again, and honored members of COG. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a little bit of what we've been doing in the Northern Virginia area in terms of an economic development alliance. I need to tell you before I start that our Board of Supervisors really emphasized this when I came on board about 1.5 years ago. Each of the supervisors that I met with, from Supervisor Lusk, you know, all the way to Chairman McKay, every one of them said the same thing: we need to collaborate more. So that's what we went forth with. And then in September of 2019, just 2 months after I started, we actually signed an alliance with these 10 jurisdictions that you see on this map. From Alexandria to Prince William County, Fall Church, Loudoun County, Arlington County, Fairfax County, all of us got together and decided that we would work together. And I will say this: when we first started, it was something of a nice thing to do. We thought it was a good thing to do, but I got to be honest with you, after COVID-19 hit, it became essential. It became essential for how we competed. It became essential for how we responded to our businesses in our region. Next slide, please. This slide really kind of captures some of the things that are going on in Northern Virginia right now. And we really, when we go out now, we go out with the message of innovation lives here. We've stood up a website which boasts innovation lives here. It has data on all 10 jurisdictions, and that content was provided by each of the jurisdictions. I have to say that you know, Telly Tucker in Arlington County, and Christina Wynn and Stephanie Landrum have really put their staff and their lives into this to make it really sing. And I have to say that if you look at this, we don't just sell Fairfax County when we go out now. We actually, and since we're digital, we actually sell the whole region. And I'll talk more about that in detail. But all the way to the right, you see the MICRON factory, a $3 billion factory that's under construction. This is a chip factory under construction in Manassas, the city of Manassas. The Microsoft headquarters just announced last May, June, 400,000 square feet in Reston. The new HQ2 headquarters tower in Arlington County that everyone knows about. And Google, which doubled their space in Northern Virginia just last year. Next slide, please. This is probably the thing that headlines the most for the region and really has worked well for not just us, but I think for the entire region, all the way across the river even. Amazon HQ2 has attracted a lot of attention. They've hired they're hired over 2,000 people now. Last I heard, their plans for development were $2 billion. I think they're moving a little bit north of $2 billion right now, considering they just made another acquisition and demolition in Arlington County. Next slide, please. And a companion piece to attracting Amazon to this region was to create a talent pipeline. I would like to say that we didn't just sell Virginia Tech campus. We didn't just sell George Mason campus. We sold all 64 universities in the region. We talked about the 4,000 students that are enrolled, the 90,000 that graduate every year. We talked about the educational attainment in the region. These were powerful value propositions that Amazon and others accept. This will be $1 billion campus right on top of a rail station in Alexandria, just south of the HQ2 headquarters, which is in Arlington. And this is going to be a $1 billion campus, $500 million private, $500 million public. Next slide, please. Another campus that tech campus that we're selling is the George Mason campus. I actually sit on the president's innovation board along with Telly Tucker and Christina Wynn. Our group of Alliance members take on different roles to really support our relationships with academic institutions, as well as relationships with business organizations like chambers of commerce. This innovation campus will be a $500 million innovation campus. 250 million is coming from the state, and the other 250 million will be private. This is the signature building, but this is not where the innovation will really take place. It will take place really throughout the region. Next slide, please. You've probably heard of the Microsoft announcement. They actually announced 400,000 square feet in Fairfax right in the May-June timeframe. And then in July, they announced an additional 45,000 square feet R&D added to that R&D facility. And then they announced 150,000 square feet in Arlington County. Telly Tucker was quite happy about that. Arlington is winning. When we win, this is how we believe. When we win, the region wins. And these are the proof points. When you have Amazon growing everywhere, Microsoft growing everywhere, this is how we win together. Next slide, please. We're very excited about Google's presence. They've doubled their presence in Northern Virginia. Google is one of those quiet companies. They are involved, obviously, in a lot of businesses, but one is the cloud. And you'll probably hear more about that in the future. But their footprint and the doubling of their footprint just speaks to how committed people are to this region. We also had Facebook announced last year. Next slide, please. This is the MICRON factory. This is going to be 1,500 employees. This $3 billion investment is going to really bring manufacturing back to this region. This site is only 40 miles from the District of Columbia. But it is going to really attract not just other customers and subcontractors, but a lot of bright people who are doing innovative things in chip development. Next slide, please. Our jurisdictions are tending to pick kind of a direction for themselves. Everyone knows that Loudoun County and Prince William County have a lot of data centers. As a matter of fact, there are about 179 data centers in Northern Virginia. Only 30 of those are in Fairfax County. All the rest are really in Prince William County and mostly in Loudoun County. But what we've been finding is that people are picking up niches like this one. This is some wet lab space that Prince William County is building. And we were all very supportive of the application when they went in for funding for this. Next slide, please. So, being the data center alley of the world is a pretty interesting position to be in. From what we know right now and from what we can gather, because a lot of the information on internet traffic is secret, so we don't know of it, but we can estimate about 70% of the internet traffic of the world flows through Northern Virginia. This gives us a tremendous competitive advantage when you're trying to attract a company that really needs high speed, and they would physically want to be located or have their cloud facility located right near the major pipes of the world. Next slide, please. Innovation didn't just start in Northern Virginia with this tagline that we put together. It's been here. ARPANET was the beginning of the internet. That was almost 50 years ago, developed in Arlington County for the Army. And then it was transferred to academic institutions. And then it created e-commerce. I mean, the bottom line is that these innovations that take place in Northern Virginia often are not commercialized here. This is what we're going to focus more on. And this is as a team, as a group of 10. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk briefly about what we've done since COVID hit, and then talk about kind of a vision for the entire region. So we actually launched a website, which is Innovation Lives Here. In addition to that, we launched a separate talent website. Our first month in April of last year, we had 300 hits. We now get 20,000 hits a month. We advertise about 87,000 jobs on that site, and we also use it to drive traffic to our virtual career fairs that we have. We've done virtual career fairs in cloud computing, in data analytics. We've done them in hospitality transitioning from hospitality to other retail jobs, doing jobs matching for companies that were surge hiring. We do research together. We've done grant applications together. We've done 2 webinar series. We completed one, which was a 12 installment webinar series. We all jointly paid for it. and we all marketed it to all our businesses on how to access PPP, how to access EIDL, and we really try to make sure that what we provide for our organization is really free and available to all the organizations in the region. We marketed a program called the RISE Grant. Our Board of Supervisors did a tremendous, gave us tremendous support in this area. They allocated over $52 million. It was focused on businesses with 50 employees or less. 72% of those businesses were minority, women, or veteran-owned businesses. So we didn't just do that. All 3 or 4 of the other jurisdictions did it also, and we shared information on how we wanted people to apply, how we were going to make sure that they qualify. And all of this exchange of information really made it easier for us to serve our clients. And the final point that I'll make is that we're looking at joint marketing missions. We've done 2 already. One actually physically we did in 2019, in December of 2019 to Chicago. Actually, Supervisor Lusk did that one. And then we are now doing them virtual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Iannucci, you can pick up when you're ready.
I'm ready to go. Just switch over to my presentation. Thank you. It's a real honor to have a chance to speak to the COG board. I'm going to say that we're quite pleased to give you a presentation on the Maryland National Capital Regional Economic Development Alliance, or MICRON, that was created by the 6 counties on the Maryland side of the river, with strong encouragement from our elected officials, such as Councilman Davis, who's on the call, the county executives, and so forth. Next slide, please. I'm a past secretary of what's now the Maryland Department of Commerce. So the good news was I knew a lot of the economic development leaders in Maryland, and it was very easy kind of to initiate some conversations. We actually began conversations in the summer of 2019. We really much brought the organization together in the fall of 2019. But by the time we actually signed our organizing document, we were online. You can see, and this is us making it official with a series of mission statements and goals and aspirations and so forth. Next slide, please. So these are the 6 counties that we work together on. We initially were thinking about we'd meet quarterly. Then we started getting together on a monthly basis. When COVID hit, as Victor said, we immediately went into a hyperdrive and we began meeting weekly. And we have met weekly since early March of 2020. Every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, in fact, the meeting is going on right now. We get together and they frequently go well over an hour meetings, and we'll talk about some of the things we cover, but they're very dynamic meetings. I will tell you, some of my colleagues on this call have told me more than once that it is literally the most important call of the week as far as they're concerned, where we have a chance to exchange notes. Next slide, please. These are the counties that are represented, and you can see the directors of the various economic development organizations. It has become a very, very close working relationship among these individuals. I think we all look forward to the time where we'll be able to sit together in the same room. But one of the ironies is that COVID, we wouldn't be meeting in person once a week if it was not in a COVID environment. We couldn't afford the travel and so forth. So COVID has given us a chance to do it virtually on a weekly basis again. Next slide, please. So these are examples of some of the COVID response programs that Prince George's County stood up. And this has been taking a lot of our time as an organization to go over these. We'll go to the next slide. Each county, of course, put together its own programs, and you can see a list of some of the things that have been covered there. General businesses, childcare, retail, arts, tourism, pretty much a broad range of businesses. One county, Anne Arundel County, even had a venison relief program. The total funding in COVID business relief that the 6 county organizations have put out is well over $162 million and over 12,000 companies. These are, for the most part, direct grants to businesses in 6 counties that, in fact, reflect our very serious organization to put dollars out to help deal with the COVID crisis. Next slide, please. These are some of the other areas where we've had a collaboration. We are working together, led by Montgomery County, on a 6-county regional survey to understand where the business community is in responding to the COVID crisis. We have shared best practices, and we're in organizational programming in terms of what works and what doesn't work. We constantly are exchanging information on the various grant programs that are out there at all levels of the federal government. We have actually started exchanging prospect information. For instance, Howard County was introduced to a biotechnology prospect. They decided it was not a good fit for them. They referred that to Montgomery County. And there have been other examples where Howard County worked with Prince George's County on data center initiative. All of us are focusing on that. We understand what Victor is talking about, some of the great wealth that's in Virginia in the data centers. Maryland joined 37 other states in exempting data centers from the sales and use tax exemption, and immediately has given us a chance to compete. This is an area where we will be working together regionally, cooperative competition, as some say, to go after this initiative. And we've had great information exchanges with different presentations on a variety of issues. Next subject. Next slide, please. These are some of the areas where we will be moving forward in the next few months on potentially doing some joint missions when we're in a position to do that. We've already started doing joint marketing. We've set up a website on the Maryland Economic Development Association website. We're putting the 6 organizations together from a regional standpoint, from dealing with workforce, attractions, economic advantage, and so forth. We view the chance to work together on issues such as quantum computing, cybersecurity, biotechnology, IT, data centers, and even last mile centers is one of the areas where we've had a chance to, again, share information, share marketing advantages, and so forth. Next slide. So happy to answer any questions. Again, we're off to a very good start. We're 18 months into it. In Maryland, we look forward to continue to grow our organization, to move forward as we get past the COVID crisis, to explore chances for the future, working with our friends on the other side of the river on doing something regionally. We all buy into the idea of regionalism, the very strong commitment to work together, that everyone understands it's their right and their responsibility to sell their own jurisdiction. But what's important to that is understand that doesn't mean disparaging a competition. You work together for the best betterment of the entire region. So I'm happy to have had this chance. Thank you.
Victor and David, thank you both. I'm very excited to hear those presentations, both what's going on inside your jurisdictions, and David, the work among the various jurisdictions inside Prince George's County was really interesting to hear, and the work that both of you all are doing really to support the region, because we rise and fall together. So I want to kick it over first to our co-opetition cheerleader in chief, Derek David from Prince George's County, since we just heard from the Prince George's County Economic Development Director.
Thanks, Chair White. Now, I think that is probably going to become, in a term limited council members, a part of his resume. I think that, and I thank Victor Hoskins for coining that phrase during one of our meetings. And I'm so glad that you guys finally got an opportunity to hear from who has essentially been my partner in economic development since I was elected back in 2011, who essentially said in a tough time, look, we need to have an economic development incentive fund here in Prince George's County so that we can begin to, regardless of what's going on around us, invest in opportunities. And I'll be the first to tell you that when I first met David, he was focused like a bureaucrat with a pencil and an eraser on making sure that Prince George's County moved its needle in the state of Maryland. To be at this point where he is the quarterback for the team, creating the collaboration between Howard County, Charles County, Frederick County, Prince George's, and Montgomery County, I am more than proud and more than just confident and comfortable with the fact that what he has brought to Prince George's will continue to permeate the state. And that spirit of co-opetition is really the bridge. You know, it's the bridge that gets us across what's currently called the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. But I think we should change that too at some point in the near future, because you guys know I ain't afraid. But the reality is that, as we have said, you know, there are no moats that we can't traverse in the Washington metropolitan region, that the DMV is connected in a way where we are essentially, because of the spirit of regionalism, the very best place in this country, probably the world, to live, work, play, and pray. That's something that we've been doing. David, one of the things that I don't think we mentioned is essentially our relationship as we had to create a new opportunity for our regional medical center in Prince George's County, and all of the potential partnerships. I think one of the things that I think my early days, feels like it was 14 or 15 when I participated in Leadership Greater Washington, and we used to talk about the reality of big pharma and the medical industry. And if you're watching the stock market, they're kicking tail and going to kick tail forever. I don't hear us talk about that relationship much. I'm, you know, keen, and when HQ2 opportunity came, we were all over it like a cheap suit, all of us in the region. When it was time to prepare Metro for the future, and even in this agenda today, we talked about pushing PREA and making sure PREA continues to escalate. Our transit system that connects us is critical, and we all know it. But maybe, are we missing, and I put this out there to both Victor and David, are we missing an opportunity to take big pharma and bring them to the Washington metropolitan region and make them a huge part of what we do here as a nexus? Just throw that out there to get us started.
I'll say that our friends in Montgomery County certainly have the incredible foundation for that. I think we would all recognize that Montgomery County is the I would argue, the regional leader, the state, certainly the state leader when it comes to biotechnology and life sciences. And I know that we are actually on our side of the ICC starting to see some of the spillover effect from that. People suddenly realize that they could be in Prince George's County a 20-minute ride away and save about $15 to $20 a square foot as well. So I think there is a chance. When I was in Baltimore County, kind of a brief sojourn between my state role and here, we had a chance to compete for a major, massive biopharmaceutical manufacturing project, which we actually came in second place to. It's now under construction, if not open, down in North Carolina. So there are some advantages there. It is a very land demanding and expensive proposition, but there are some opportunities, certainly.
I agree with David on that point. I agree with David. And Montgomery County certainly is the place in the region that has the preponderance and really the undergirding of infrastructure and talent to really be host to such an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And we have a couple questions queued up. Christian Dorsey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Mr. Iannucci and Mr. Hoskins for that presentation. You know, it goes without saying that economic development is such an existential issue and need for our region, and I love the professionalism and the comprehensive approach that you have presented to us today. You know, our region's vibrance is predicated on our being, in some ways, diversified from just being a government town, and your presentations really showed how we're achieving that. And I just wanted to mention, you know, from economic development comes a lot of different effects. We've got job growth, which naturally occurs from that. From jobs comes the need for housing growth. From housing growth comes the need for transportation choices and options. And with all of that, we have the need to absorb more people and to have them move around, which creates the need for our region to be sustainable. And those are all sort of key effects of economic development that are really the priorities and in the wheelhouse of COG. So I would love to just get your thoughts to my desire to see that your work be more integrated with what we do, because at the end of the day, you know, what we all love is that this is a regional approach. The regionalism that you espouse is incredibly important. And I can really think of no other institutional entity in our region that embodies regionalism like COG and our metropolitan planning organization, the TPB. So somehow, some way, I would love for us to, either through conversation, informally, or something more formal, to better support our efforts, because the one thing that can diminish our regional approach is if we devolve into competition without the cooperation. And I think somehow COG becomes that sort of institutional fulcrum to make sure that doesn't happen. So I just love to get your responses to that and see how we might continue to engage.
Definitely. Councilman Dorsey, first of all, it's a pleasure to see you. I miss you guys in Arlington. God, man, you guys are doing great stuff there. I want to say that I mentioned that the tone that I received from every single supervisor that I sat down with, Supervisor Gross, Supervisor Lusk, Supervisor McKay, every one of them told me the same thing. We need to collaborate. We need to figure out how to work together. So I think the first stage was us figuring how to work together in Northern Virginia. And shortly after David established his group over there in suburban Maryland, I reached out to David and I said, hey, David, maybe we ought to think about, how we can do this. And a fortunate circumstance, Connected DMV launched an initiative, and with the task force on recovery, we now are in those conversations. As a matter of fact, David's team, my team, folks from DC, folks from Montgomery County are all working on basically a set of operating principles, all the things that we agree on to do together, some specific things, actions that we can take as a regional economic development entity, and trying to figure out a single brand. And I think the single brand is already there, DMV. I'm getting a little feedback. I think the single brand is already there with the DMV, but really that process has already started. We just finished the first phase of research, and now we're moving into the second phase. It's been funded partially by us in Northern Virginia and the folks in suburban Maryland, as well as Connected DMV and some private companies. So I think we're headed there. It's not going to be as fast as people may want. It's not going to be as easy as some may anticipate. I'm one of those people that believe that anything easy probably is not that good. Something that's hard is probably going to be great. I've never done an easy thing in my life that was great. Everything that I did that was hard was great. So it's going to take some work. We've already made some faux pas, but we're figuring it out. And I think that what we need to have in the middle of all of this is a core ethos of trust, a core ethos of mutual support. And if we can go forward with that, I think that we're going to get there. But it's going to take time. And by the way, I need to tell you, Chuck Bean has been right in the middle of all of this. Chuck Bean quietly works behind the scenes. He gave me a phone call shortly after the announcement from Maryland, of Maryland's alliance, and he said, "Victor, have you talked to David lately?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, you really ought to give David a call." So everybody's doing the thing that they need to do to get us there, but it's going to take time. I think that's the only thing I want. We just have to be patient.
Thank you very much. We have right now about 5 questions lined up in 10 minutes. So I'm just, you don't have to speed, but just be mindful. Ruben, I think you're next on my list.
Yeah, how's everybody doing? I wanted to kind of first off express how appreciative Charles County is of being a part of this collaborative, but I wanted to kind of share with you, the deliberations in our Board of Commissioners actually approving being a member with the Maryland Collaborative. Competition was one of the issues that was raised more than anything else. And I think all of us can recognize that as it relates to economic development, we're all looking at essentially, a bite at the same pie. And in order to be a part of really understanding the significance of a regional approach, you have to close your mind to that old way of thinking and recognize that as a region, it benefits all of us to work together. And so I kind of wanted to share that because I'm listening to this presentation, which is extremely impressive to me. It makes me recall the deliberations with our boards where it started turning into a conversation about, well, how is that going to help Charles County? How would that hurt Charles County? And I see one of my colleagues is on Commissioner Coates as well, and I'm sure she can recall the same thing, but this will provide opportunities for all of our residents by being a part of this regional approach to building the overall economies within the region. And so I just kind of wanted to share that perspective and thank all of those that are participants.
Thank you very much. Nancy Navarro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate this presentation. It is so important, especially as we're all trying to work on post-COVID-19 recovery as a region. I want to, shout out COG because they inspired me to present to my council when I was president in 2019, a framework, an economic development platform. And it was just a framework that included housing, workforce development, business growth. And undergirding all of this, of course, was racial equity and social justice and expanding our tax base. And it is important to have that kind of framework, as it was alluded to, so that we can populate all of those areas, but also be able to collaborate with our regional partners, because I believe that each jurisdiction brings to the table important assets that we can leverage regionally. And so, if Prince George's County happens to have more land available for some opportunities, that I think that's wonderful. If Montgomery County can leverage our federal assets and our biotech, life science, vibrant ecosystem to make something like that happen, that we could leverage around. If Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, I believe that as a region, and we've had so many conversations about this, that we have an extraordinary brand that really does lift everybody up. And so I'm thrilled to hear this update. And I personally look forward to continuing to work with all of you to leverage everything, because as I said, the post-COVID-19 economic recovery, it's going to be different. I like to be optimistic and say that it has opened some opportunities that perhaps we were not focused on as much. But there is no doubt that it's also going to bring some particular challenges that if we all work together, we can address. So just wanted to say thank you, and for those of you who are kind of new at COG, just to reiterate that this kind of deliberation really is wonderful, because it does bring forth a lot of regional understanding as well as branding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie Briskman.
Thank you, Chair White. So when I was looking at the Northern Virginia presentation, I got all excited and I wanted to go retweet it out, and it doesn't look like there's a Twitter account yet for the Northern Virginia EDA. So I hope that it's coming soon. That was my first question. And secondly, and I know we're short on time, so maybe just a bit of encouragement. I enjoy seeing the bright and shiny new buildings and the new initiatives that are happening. But in Loudoun County, and I'm sure in some other counties, we are extremely over-retailed, and we have a lot of opportunity for revitalization and reuse. We have a rather large mall that just lost its second anchor store. In my district, we've got GW and Genelia, which is all zoned for research, campus style development, and not a lot has happened there. So I guess my point is a bit of encouragement to look in these initiatives at revitalization and renovation of existing resources, because I feel like we may not always need to build from the ground up and fancy buildings with mirrored outside shells and that sort of thing. We've got a lot of existing infrastructure and a lot of zoning that actually might be compatible, and land that might be compatible to some of these initiatives moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Briskman. Mark Elrick.
How are you all doing? I just wanted to just say real quickly that, you know, Montgomery County has kind of been in a jobs doldrum for more than a decade now. And one of the things we're trying to do is to bring a more deliberate focus to how to attract jobs to the county. Um, for us, it's less about zoning. I mean, I'm probably like everybody else. I sit on 10 million square feet of, you know, empty space. I've got 20 million square feet of unbuilt projects that sit in pipelines. And the problem here is, you know, bringing businesses here and everybody's, you know, whether it's the office park or the park that somebody else just talked about, or buildings, there's a lot of need and opportunities to repurpose. But we've also signed the joint development agreement with WMATA on MOU for the joint development of the White Flint Metro Station, which for us is the largest metro site that's relatively undeveloped in the county. And so we're looking at that as an opportunity to really bring a focus on purpose-driven development. There's been a lot of interest in life sciences and in the computing world for potential there, and that's the place we're going to try to go. So I think we're trying to learn to be deliberate about driving economic development, not just sitting back and saying, I've zoned it, why don't you come here? It's more like, now that stuff is in place to be zoned, now that things have been zoned, what do I do to get you here? And why do you want to be here? And that's the work that we're trying to drive. And, you know, I appreciated having the opportunity to talk to Victor early on when I came into office, and frankly, with some of the other companies that I had wondered why they had never put a foot in Montgomery County. Like 1776, which actually now has the space in Montgomery County, was asking people, what don't we have? And, you know, what do you need us to do? And we're trying to be responsive to that. And I think, you know, we're going to try to pull our weight regionally in terms of producing jobs, because if I can produce jobs, then I create demand for housing. But if you don't have jobs, you're not going to build housing. That's just not happening.
Thank you very much. Tim Adams, did you have a question? Yeah, I see your hand up. There we go.
Yes, hey, thank you. And I also appreciated all of the presentations. But the one thing I would like to say for all of us, number one, is hopefully that for what's happened on, as my good colleague and council member said, as we take it to the bridge, so to speak, that we have a way of sharing lessons learned from both sides when it comes to that true economic development, that they're able to share lessons learned. David and as a gentleman to do that. And secondly, I think one thing that's very important for us as we look forward to this, and that is we talk about all those things, but we've got to talk about education as we do this. And so as we talk about the development, as we talk about the growth, as we talk about the jobs and bringing in more people, we have to make sure that we include the education side. We have to make sure that we know that that's where a lot of the equity and inclusion starts, is with education. We need to make sure that as we talk about growing, that we can make sure our pre-K through 12 can keep up with that growth, and that there's a planning process that goes along with that. Because we have seen where we've had growth in our schools of over 150%. And so we need to, I think, at somehow make sure we keep that as a part of the process as we look forward of doing economic growth and doing things, that we also make sure that education is a part of that. And that's a key part that we continue to include as we look at what we may be doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our COVID speaker is here, but we do have Rodney Lusko. With your question or comment at the end, I would ask if you would make a motion for the resolution at the end of your question or comment. You're on mute, sir.
I've done this a million times. I just want to go quickly and say I'm grateful for the work that's being done on collaboration and regionalism, and I think this is so vital and so important. I just want to add a little color. Victor mentioned that I had worked for him for about 4 months. I'd worked for the previous economic development director for 20 years in Fairfax County. So my job was to go out and recruit companies from all of the United States, and I was bullish on this. And I was pretty much aggressive about making sure we won. And I'll be clear in saying we looked at this as kind of like a zero-sum game, because either we're going to win or someone else is going to win. And that was pretty much the ethos. And I want to commend Victor for his introduction really on this collaboration and saying that there's a different way we can approach it. And what he also did for me personally is he said, Rodney, you're going to be the person that goes out on our first collaborative mission. And I got to tell you, it took a little bit of, retrained of my own sort of processing, because what I had to do was to really look at all the different areas that were part of this alliance and compact, and to make sure I understood what was their value proposition.
That's right.
When I got into the conversations with the different site selectors, I was able to identify where there were strengths and unique advantages for those site selectors to look at other areas in Fairfax County. And I got to tell you, I had never, ever done that before. But I think in the end, this makes the most sense. And again, on workforce development, on collaboration, and really, Victor, I know this is a part of who you are, and I appreciate the way that you approach your work, and I appreciate the opportunities that you give your staff. I just want to also mention this about Victor as well. Victor and I worked on the Microsoft deal in the early iterations of it. And I said to him, I'll put together the PowerPoint, and I thought I was going to just hand it off to Victor, and Victor was going to go and do the PowerPoint. He said, no, Roger, we're going to do the PowerPoint. And we were at the table together, and we made the pitch, and I thought we had a pretty good pitch, Victor. And luckily, in the end, Fairfax County obviously won that deal, but I'm so happy to hear about Arlington as well. So I think this probably shows that importance and that value. And I think I've gone a little long, but I just wanted to be clear in saying this does work at the staff level, and I think the beauty is it's going to make a huge difference when we get to that regional component as well. And I can hear that that's what's being discussed, and I'm just delighted that this is progressing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you need me to make a motion.
Please.
Okay, and
It says a motion to approve resolution R16-2021.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve resolution RC 621.
Mr. Chairman, and as the recipient of that across the bridge, I'll second that motion. And really, as I second that motion, I think it is important. I think you started off singing the praises of Victor Hoskins, and Rodney closed with it. And I could tell similar stories, but I won't about me and Mr. Iannucci. But what I will say, and I credit during his tenure as a member of Prince George's County, he introduced me to a book that really, to me, articulates everything Rodney Lusk just said. And it's called The Blue Ocean Strategy, as opposed to the Red Ocean Strategy. And we had a conversation about that. And embedded in that is the spirit that really is conveyed in what we're doing here today. So I look forward to it as I second the motion.
Thank you very much. There's been a motion and a second. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? Hearing none, the motion passes, and want to again extend our thanks to Mr. Hoskins and Mr. Iannucci. Thank you both. Sounds like we might need to have you back because there's an abundance of interest in this issue, as you all can see. Speaking of an abundance of interest, we will move to agenda item 10 on COVID-19 vaccine distribution. This is our last agenda item for the day. And we welcome Montgomery County Health Officer, Dr. Travis Gales, who will provide an update on the COVID-19 vaccine distribution in the region. First, I'd like to turn it over to Executive Director Chuck Bean to provide updates on coordination within COG.
Thank you. There's a number of points of connection. At the core of this is the Chief Health Officers Committee. Very appreciative that Dr. Gales, along with Dr. Nesbitt from the district, are chairing that. But also the emergency managers, public health planners, are coordinators of resources. At the top are the city and county managers. I'd be happy to offer some additional remarks, but I think let's give it to Dr. Gales. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to provide an update to you all. I'm honored to represent this update on behalf of my fellow colleagues and health officers across the National Capital Region. First, I'd also like to extend a thank you to you all for your continued support in the execution and delivery of public health care services. Thank you for your advocacy as well locally, regionally, and at the state and national levels. While there is certainly promise in the pandemic response as evidenced by improving surveillance numbers and improving community transmission levels, we still have significant work left to be done, including balancing the presence of new variant strains that have been identified in Maryland, Virginia, and the National Capital Region, balancing health concerns with reopening of businesses and schools, and improving access to services, both clinical services as well as social support services related to the ongoing pandemic response. Well, for many decades, health departments have served the role of chief community health strategists, deliverer of services to those most vulnerable and in need, and a behind-the-scenes arbiter to ensure that residents are safe. In spite of many years of being underfunded, we have maximized the public health infrastructure to tailor public health efforts to the needs, resources, and possibilities of each local jurisdiction. We've developed an in-depth understanding of our respective communities so that in times of crisis, we are able to consider and address unique barriers faced by different community members, such as transportation, language, and healthcare hesitancy and literacy. The COVID pandemic has reminded the world, and all of us certainly locally, of the efforts of the health department, and we continue to leverage these partnerships to continue pandemic management, most recently in vaccine distribution. Local health departments in each state are leading the way and distributing higher percentages of vaccines to residents in comparison to retail pharmacies and other venues. In addition to achieving a high volume of distribution, local health departments have championed fair, equitable access models to prioritize the need for fair, equitable access to vaccines, particularly to those communities most vulnerable, as evidenced by COVID case rates and COVID-related fatalities. We continue to stand up testing operations, social support linkage programs, and execute other core functions of public health, including access to prenatal care, cancer screenings, HIV prevention and treatment, and safer restaurant practices. Well, there are ongoing challenges we face, namely how to move forward within the pandemic response in the setting of limited resources, including inadequate vaccine supplies, bulky communications infrastructure around vaccine distribution and administration, and the lack of the ability to provide timely, comprehensive information to you all as our elected officials in our respective jurisdictions, as well as to our residents. Now, I wanted to provide a couple key bullet points and save some time for questions and dialogue in terms of a vaccine update where we stand. From a scientific standpoint, as many of you all are aware by now, we have two candidates that have been successfully approved, and both of those candidates are two-dose regimen for the vaccine. Now, there are other candidates in the pipeline, most notably a candidate from Johnson & Johnson, which is a one-dose vaccine candidate that I believe their EUA hearing is in late February and could be approved for dispersal within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Now, we don't have clear understanding of how much vaccine will be provided when that is approved. However, the new administration is working to increase the percentage of doses supplied to each state and thereby hopefully to each local jurisdiction, including some early estimates of approximately 5 to 6 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine available if and when it's approved in the short term. Now, the vaccine supply issue is a big issue that many of you all have heard, I'm sure, your local health officers talk about. Certainly, we had our meeting on Monday, and that remains to be a big concern for all of us. So I'm not telling you anything that is something that is new. The vaccine supply issue remains a significant concern for the states as well as local jurisdiction. In addition to limited supply, We also are unfortunately not finding out what our weekly allotments are until much later in the game. And that hamstrings us and prevents us from being able to stand up clinics in a more timely manner to address and meet the concerns of local residents, and also to hopefully diffuse some of the chaos and confusion related to multiple sites administering the vaccine on different schedules with different registration portals and platforms, as well as not necessarily having a shared level of responsiveness and to constituent concerns, and certainly a responsibility to have an equitable distribution platform. So just to give you a sense of some of the numbers and what that means in terms of capacity, for example, in Montgomery County, we as a health department, also an inclusive of other doses that other vendors have received somewhere over 60,000 doses. By the definition of who is eligible in the state of Maryland, that would make over nearly 300,000 Montgomery County residents eligible to be vaccinated. But again, 60-some thousand doses supplied, 300,000 individuals eligible. So it doesn't take complicated view to see that, again, significant supply issues. And as a result of that, each of us have created some type of prioritization framework to attempt to assess those at higher risk by virtue of the type of work that they do and the type of exposure that they face, as well as based upon the early surveillance and epidemiologic information, those who may be at greatest risk of having an adverse outcome if they contract COVID. So we've attempted to do that to try to move through the prioritization groups, again, to get the vaccine out as quickly as we can to as many people as we can. The other challenge, again, I just want to emphasize is that lack of a timely communication of that information makes it difficult to find out when we can stand things up. So again, for a local example, we find out our allocations for the following week, unfortunately, on average, Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening. We will find out the doses that will be delivered on Tuesday afternoon to then be used from the following week, Wednesday to Wednesday. So these, again, are just some of the challenges that we are facing. That translates into frustration by local residents, which translates into frustration that you all get in terms of feedback from our constituents. Now, as we continue to expand distribution, which we are all excited about, we all encourage that and we all want to get more doses out, we continue to be mindful that we need to have fair, equitable distribution of vaccines. And this plays out when we're talking about the advent of large mass vaccination sites. I know that there's several that are popping up in Maryland, that some have done a soft launch, and there are 6 or 7 that will be in full effect starting next week. And we know that that is being discussed in other jurisdictions as well as we increase allocations and doses to retail pharmacies and other venues to provide doses to our residents. Without careful attention to a fair, equitable framework, the same disparities that predate COVID have been confirmed and reminded us during COVID will further be cemented as we move ahead in terms of moving past COVID into a post-COVID world. The last couple of points that I would just highlight in terms of challenges or ongoing issues that we face in vaccine distribution is a key area is how it relates to messaging to address any potential questions or concerns related to vaccine distribution or potential reluctance. Improved communication needs to be accomplished first by engaging communities to address their concerns and to find out what their concerns are. And to then be able to create and craft effective strategies that not only address the concerns, but promote and offer substantial messaging to encourage vaccination, and also access and provide seamless opportunities for individuals to receive the vaccine. So those are some of the global issues that we are facing from a health department perspective as we continue to roll out and administer doses to our residents. Again, thank you all for your advocacy on multiple levels. We appreciate the support that you have. We know that we are probably stressing you all out as we continue to work through these challenges and try to get doses out as quickly as we can, because it seems that every day there's new information, there's a new challenge, there's a new pivot, but we're doing the best we can to get the doses out and get as many people covered as quickly as we can. That concludes my presentation, but I would be happy to address any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gales. We appreciate you taking the time and the work that you and your fellow health officials are doing and continue to do over the course of the pandemic. You all have gotten a bright spotlight over this past year or so. I want to now facilitate questions from board members. So if board members have questions, now would be the time.
Mr. Chairman.
I think David Snyder and then Mark Wolf.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank all the public health people for the work that you've been doing under very difficult circumstances. I will say, you mentioned a minute ago, stress. I think the stress is large and mounting among our constituents. We're forced into a triage situation. What is fair? Well, if you're 65 and not able to get the vaccine, you think that's not fair. If you live in a vulnerable community and are an essential worker and you're not able to get your vaccine, you think that's not fair. So my question is, exactly what do we need in terms of the supply of vaccine to give you, the public health people, what you need to get the vaccines out to private physicians and pharmacies and elsewhere, just like you can get the flu vaccine from multiple sources? What do we need? And it seems to me we as a region ought to be very specific. We can say we need more, but that's getting lost in the debate. I think what I would look for is a calculation of what do we need and when do we need it, and hopefully the region will rise to the occasion as advocates, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of the country, whether it's using the Defense Production Act or what it is. And I would just hope that we could take some collective action, not just to request more, but to be more specific so we can get beyond this triage of trying to determine what's fair and what's not fair, but rather get it out to the entire population as quickly as possible. So what do you suggest, Mr. Gale, we do as a region to address it seems to me what you're saying is the basic supply issue is where we are. So why don't we address that to the people, the federal officials, and to the private sector to get the supply ramped up more rapidly than it apparently is. So let me ask you, what do we do next on this, and how can we get the data we need to be quite specific in our advocacy? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question, Mr. Snyder. There are multiple prongs to your question that some are a little bit more complicated than others. The first one to address in terms of capacity, quite simply, you're right. Getting more doses, increasing production at a federal level, and increasing the production, whether it's through Defense Production Act or other mechanisms, would increase the amount of supply that federal folks can provide to states to then thereby be able to distribute to local jurisdictions. That has a added benefit, because to get to the point where you mentioned in terms of all of the doses that go to private pharmacies or would eventually go to private providers come from those allotments that the state receives. So right now, in a limited supply, all of the doses that are going to Safeway, Giant, Rite Aid, CVS, independent living places, nursing homes, health departments, hospitals are coming from one pool. And so when that's a fixed pool, anytime you shift doses to one place, you're ultimately pulling doses from another platform. And it creates a competition of sorts, which we don't want to have happen. Ultimately, by increasing those number of doses there, you can put more doses in each of those different places, recognizing that by increasing the diversity of options you have, you begin to chip away and increase the points of access that folks have to be able to come in and get it. Now, the second challenge with that, though, is when it comes to distributing to the private providers, that is a state-by-state decision. So there could be a conversation, if you will, amongst the states and the District of Columbia to discuss moving forward in a similar way. So for example, the state of Maryland, private providers can register in the Immunet system to say, I would like to receive vaccine, but the state at this time has not released those doses to go to those providers. The plan was, if the supply was adequate, that private providers would be able to get access to the vaccine as we move to phase 2 by definition in the state of Maryland, and they would be able to administer doses in their offices. So, and I know there's some variation from state to state on that, so there could be potential agreement for a regional approach with that. And I think the third piece is going back to is just the continued advocacy of even when we set up all of these multiple spaces and multiple points for folks to get access, what are they actually getting access to? So for example, I've got parents who are eligible for the vaccine. I've been taking off my public health hat and trying to be a son to figure out where to get access to the vaccine. So the state of Virginia, they live in Virginia, they live in Southern Virginia, not in any of you all's jurisdictions. There's a CVS in my hometown. And my father called, he said, well, CVS, the state reported that CVS is going to be offering vaccines. So immediately I get online to go and find out when I can schedule an appointment. The closest CVS to my parents is 2 hours away. And so even as we continue to increase access and pull more stores and more venues online, we have to continue to think about how it is distributed geographically, what neighborhoods, how they're put into the neighborhoods, and then what kind of system is set up when you actually go to register. And it was interesting, a lot of the CVSs are in Richmond, Tidewater, and Northern Virginia. I do recognize those are the population centers. But within 30 minutes, all of their sites were completely booked. And so I know that's a long answer, but hopefully that addressed the multiple pieces of your question to give you a sense of the comprehensive nature of a response that could be needed.
Thank you very much. And I still look for as much specificity on the metrics and numbers as we can possibly get. I think it helps our advocacy if we can be very clear about what's success and what is failure. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Mr. Wolf. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry, thought I was. Anyway, Doctor, thank you so very much. I appreciate your work and that of all your work, your co-workers. Got a question that frankly may be a little Virginia specific. So if it's outside your realm, I appreciate that. But I think it gets to a larger issue. In Virginia, we've had the situation where you talked about CVS. And people go register, but gee whiz, wow, the CVS data site won't communicate with Virginia Health Department in terms of registering people. You have the situation you talked about, you get information about your doses on Tuesday that begin the next day. This is a management issue. I mean, yes, we all know we need more doses. That's a whole other question. But we have a systematic management communications issue going on with this process. And I frankly need your opinion. Where does the fault lie here? Because I'm willing to talk to anyone I need to talk to help make the process work smoother. And we have had for 3 months now a terrible situation of communication, lack of communication, contradictory communication, and that's leading to the frustration you're referencing, which all of our constituents are hitting us with and your parents have dealt with. It's not acceptable. We've got to fix it. So where does the problem lie from your side?
Thank you for the great question. We've had lots of conversations about this, and you know,
imagine.
Yeah, we have, and so part of the challenge is that there are multiple information systems that, as you referenced, don't talk to each other. So if the states have a registration system that is different from the registration system in some instances with hospitals, which is different from the registration system from pharmacies. And by doing so, it's difficult to be able to track information, track one person through a system to find out where they are, where they're accessing information. And this gets to Mr. Snyder's question related to one of the challenges in pulling the data to find out who's been vaccinated is you've got to go a couple different places to pull it and make sure it's clean to then be able to say, in the National Capital Region, 60% of 75-year-olds, 75 plus have been vaccinated. So that's the essential question there is multiple systems being in place that don't talk to each other. And there is no centralized registration system. there is no centralized kind of supply system. You know, we had a conversation with, we had representatives from the state health department present to our council on yesterday. And that was one of the questions that came up is, you know, have they looked into a centralized registration system where everybody would be on the same page? And they referenced West Virginia. And West Virginia is actually doing pretty well in terms of their vaccine rates right now. And so I think that is an area where there could be good advocacy because the states typically control those platforms. That would be where your advocacy would go. So for example, in the state of Maryland, we are required by the health department as a health department entity to use the PrepMod system. And so there is, and you know, the other hospitals and pharmacies, they aren't required to do that. So we have multiple systems in place, which makes it more complicated in terms of following through the system.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate the help.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional questions? Mr. Ehrlich, we have about 3.5 minutes.
So I want to double down on something that Dr. Gale said, and the question about what to do. I think all of us know what the supply needs to be, and it's not like anybody's going to produce it. No matter what number we put out there, there's a real problem in production right now. And there's another problem in that even if the two companies that provided vaccine, if they were to contract for their entire supply, what happens to the two other companies they're going to have vaccine a month from now or 2 months from now? The biggest problem in my mind goes back to what Dr. Gales was talking about. You need a single point of entry. We need prioritization. Montgomery County and the state of Maryland prioritize 1A workers, which are front-facing health workers, and seniors over 75. Before we got halfway through that group, they then said we're prioritizing group 1C. And then it was teachers. And then it was people under 65 with disabilities until we have 300,000 people who all think they're priorities. If you want to help, and I think we all need to advocate for this because we're getting the same pressure from the federal government, we need the federal government to reassert priorities in vaccine distribution. If it's front workers and 75-year-olds, then all the doses in my county, whether it's from our health clinic or from the pharmacies, needs to go to 75-year-olds and front-facing workers until they're taken care of, and then you move on to the next group. Right now, you say people are eligible. Everybody thinks they're eligible. The state system will schedule everybody who is eligible, and therefore you have no priorities. So if you want to bring order back to this, let people know who's getting vaccinated, when they're getting vaccinated, so people can look at the progress that we make and figure out when their turn's going to come. But right now, it is chaos.
Dr. Gale, do you have 30-second thoughts on that?
I would agree. It has created a challenge for us. You know, again, going back to the numbers game, you know, the numbers don't match up. If you increase more people coming in who need it without increasing the doses you have, you get to a point where we have now where it's a competitive society. You've got people trying to game the system, not game it, but they're trying to get the vaccine. And you've got people feeling like, for lack of a better term, someone referenced in a briefing, the Lord of the Flies, or, there's just such a huge scarcity of resources available.
Well, thank you very much. We will have many more conversations on vaccine distribution, and I really want to thank Dr. Gale for your time and attention and for joining us today. Thank you so much. I want to thank the rest of the board members and COG staff for joining us and participating in the COG Board of Directors virtual meeting today. At this time, we will move to adjournment. I want to remind everybody that our next meeting will be on March 10th, 2021. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Supervisor.
Second.
And a second. Well, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone stay safe.
Avoid people.
Stay safe, mask up.
Bye, everybody.
All right.